Hi everyone, this is Sara Marks. I'm the author of Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, which is book 5 in the 21st Century Austen series. So for those of you who don't know, this is a modernization of Emma, my second modernization of Emma. Today I'm going to give you some commentary and annotations of this book from my point of view. What was I thinking? What inspired me? How did this book come to be? I'll give you an introduction to the whole book, and then we'll go chapter by chapter until the end. Let's start with the entire book. This book, Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, is what I thought I was going to write when I originally conceived of Love and War in Woodhouse Hall. That was book 3 in the series. It took me forever to figure out Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse's plot. I was, at the time, new to publishing and being bombarded with offers for free webinars and support from people who claimed to have all the answers. They could show me how to be successful. I sat in too many of these webinars before I realized they were all sharing the same thing. None of it was unique or worth my time. I could have searched for this information online, found it in blogs, found it in YouTube, but I was so hopeful for guidance that I kept attending, hoping to unlock something that would work. It would take me years to realize that what may work for some might also not work for me. Sure, others were in a position like mine, working a full-time job and trying to do indie publishing, but nobody's me. I'm me. What I realize is that too many people think that because they have done something, they should teach it to others. There are scammers on top of that in coaching circles who offer absolutely nothing. There are great coaches who have been trained to support you and have years of success on their side. I found most are people who think that they can be helpful since they know more than you, but in reality, they don't actually understand why they were successful or how to get you the success you want. Carrie was always going to be someone with a big heart, but no clue, because that's who Emma is. I wanted this to be about the world of knitting. I have been thinking about how to use my joy for crafting as part of the stories I told. The original idea was to have Carrie help the fiber world, like the whole world. If you've read the deleted Miami plotline, you know how that went. The entire idea came to life when I was visiting a yarn shop in Miami. Is it easy to find a yarn shop in Miami? No. There were 2, and this was before the pandemic. Now I think there's just 1. I knew this store specifically before I visited. I hadn't learned to knit until I moved to Massachusetts, so I didn't grow up in a yarn store in Miami. But when I went to visit my mother and father, I was often there looking for projects, looking for people to chat with. My mother often came with me as a knitter herself, often looking for me to provide her with guidance on things she needed to know. I knew the store had been struggling for a long time, and as I sat in the store chatting with the owner, who kindly let me spend a few hours with her talking about this, I knew Carrie would want to help and be completely out of her depth. Jenny, the owner of that store, was so gracious when I told her about the book, and even though I was just there to research, I bought some yarn. I still haven't used it. I know what I want to use it for, I just haven't. But she let me buy some yarn and work on my project while I chatted with the ladies who showed up. And this was the middle of the afternoon on a weekday, so the people who showed up were older women. What happens at the table stays at the table. That's what these older ladies joked as they made things for their grandkids. Little did I know that phrase would become something that stuck with me and would eventually turn into its own series. I don't think, at the time of my recording, I'm just getting started with the series. It's called The Crafters of Lecoq. We'll talk about that. But at the time, my mind spun with things I could try to help the store if I were Carrie, and how it would fail and fall apart, because I knew less than Carrie. The idea was that Carrie wasn't ready to help anyone beyond her circle. She understood her yarn community, which you will see clearly through the chapters in the clock. But take her out of that little bubble, and she would discover how privileged she was and ill-prepared. Her parents were supportive, but dealing with their own stuff. Another part of the original draft was that it would alternate between Carrie's work as a consultant and the things going on within her own store. The charity nights, the trunk shows, the yarn bombing, and more. This was my second book in Lecoq, and I still wasn't sure how this small city would play into my plans for the future. Little did I know they would become the center of it. But I was writing the first draft of Leavenworth and Woodhouse Hall, or what would become the first edition of Leavenworth and Woodhouse Hall. I was getting ready to come out, and I wanted to insert Carrie because it would strengthen the connection eventually that Amelia and Jenna had with Carrie, but it would also give readers something to carry on for, if you will. Except none of it was working. All the pieces were there, but I didn't like the story. And if I didn't like it, neither would readers. Carrie's romance with Zach was a mess. Their relationship always seemed about evolution, but they had no conflict. I knew it was about her ignoring her partner, but I had them in a committed relationship already. I also wanted her to, like Emma, not need to get married and start a family, nor want to get married and start a family. So where do you take a relationship that's fully committed if that is not what either partner is interested in? Thankfully, being surrounded by writers and coaches worked in my favor. As I said, I have found talented, helpful coaches that turned out to be a blessing. I may have been writing about a consultant who wasn't ready for this role, but I knew the people around me were learning to be writing coaches. There is a program designed to train and certify them. Part of that involves completing a practicum to finish that certification. And as luck would have it, a friend in the program met another person who happened to specialize in Austen retellings. She needed this practicum, and I needed help, even if it was just a second set of eyes and another brain to help me see through the fog, because that often happens after the first draft. It's hard to see through the fog of what you're working on and what it is now. This is why I often give my books a couple months of a rest between writing the first draft and coming back to it. It just helps clear my head and lets the ideas come, but it wasn't working for this book. But that's how I met Robin, and she was exactly what Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse and I needed. She reminded me, Emma wants to do good for her community, her town. The bigger fiber community is too much. Carrie really needs to think smaller. The businesses she tries to help should be local. We had a great hour-long Zoom call and chatted about all the things I could do. The pieces quickly came together. It was like when doing a puzzle and you start to see the elements of something and then all the similar pieces are easy to find. I knew Carrie and Zach needed something casual, not already committed. And I couldn't repeat what happened between Amelia and Adam and Unraveling and Leavenworth and Woodhouse Hall. Carrie's failure, specifically, had to be business-oriented, not political or romantic. The big failure. She was still failing on the other things. But Carrie is an adult, not new to this. She is in her 20s, but she is not still a teenager. Her journey needed to be more mature than Amelia, our previous version of Emma. With some tweaking to the community center, the Chamber of Commerce, it all started to fall into place. Suddenly, Lecoq came alive, and the future books got mapped right from there. So let's look at each chapter. Chapter 1. Each chapter starts with a knitting term. These aren't basic knitting terms. but inside references to the fiber world. They relate to what's going on in each chapter. And there are so many characters in Emma. This book too. I wanted to drop readers into a moment where Carrie was at her best. She did good work helping the bookstore opening. It meant showing the people around her as she moves through the room and celebrates her success. Zach needed to be there to ground her, and it was a chance to introduce a few of the characters and reintroduce Amelia. It set up some of the drama that was going to take place through the book as well. It was important to me to be careful with how I set up Zach and Carrie's relationship, because Carrie, like Emma, is insufferable sometimes. You have to walk a very fine line with Emma because readers love her or they hate her. Zach is a critical part of signaling to readers that she crosses that line. Here, he's delighted by her. If he's annoyed with her, then she's on the wrong side of that line. I also wanted to showcase how her brain doesn't stop. I made a sticker when I was writing this book. It says, "So I have an idea." And this came from the things that were happening and I was becoming aware of in my own life as I wrote this book. Because in that respect, Carrie and I are a lot alike. We get a lot of ideas and feel a compulsion to write them down, to just get them out. Chapter 2. When I was writing this in 2018, or at least trying to write this, on the heels of Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging, I asked a friend for yarn shop name ideas. It was my friend Laura who came up with the idea to call it My Stash. And I liked it. But over time, it changed to The Stash. I've been knitting for the past 20 years as of writing this book, or as of recording this audio, and have seen many yarn shops. The ones I like are open spaces to sit and work with others. My favorite yarn shop, which is no longer in the place that I liked the most, was a New Hampshire-based yarn shop that had the storefront with wide floor-to-ceiling windows that people could see the yarn and the knitters in there. That was my favorite space. I like that knitting groups can meet, that they allow you to bring in food. Have accidents ever happened? And these are real yarn shops. Have accidents ever happened? I'm sure they have. I've just never seen it. And a few beta readers pushed back on the cafe being in a yarn shop, but I didn't care. I felt like that's what Carrie would have said to people who questioned her decision. Yes, I did just connect the book Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging to Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse. This is the book where I started connecting all the other books in the series and to the future books. I was already outlining what became Sweeten Up Jenny Darcy. I thought all four books in the second half of the series would take place in the Lecoq at that time, so I wanted to make some connections as we continued. I considered making Lisa and Umberto's relationship and romance a bigger part of the story, but there wasn't enough room for it. This was already big. And as I was editing this with Indu, my editor at the time, I realized I could use them to launch a spin-off series. So that is where the Crafters of Lecoq starts, their romance. So stay tuned, or maybe it's already out. Chapter 3. Much of the chapter was a holdover from the first draft that Robin read. I wanted readers to understand why Carrie has the confidence she does. She's not discouraged from exploring how she can help her community. Her parents, both working outside of the store, trust her. Her brother is stuck at home with two-year-olds. He's just happy to be included. This is also the first hint of a plan to pull Carrie away from the store and into the company. Within the family, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what Carrie wants. Her parents think she's trying to build her resume so she can be an executive in the company. She just wants to run the store and help businesses in Lecoq. She is very locally focused. Chapter 4. One of Carrie's weaknesses, among many, is that she's not seeing her full community. The rich diversity of Lecoq isn't present in her store. She doesn't make it easy for people to participate. if they don't have the money to afford expensive yarn. I learned to knit 20 years ago when I was broke. I could afford to go to Walmart to get yarn. One time, I visited my local yarn shop, but I only went in there for special projects. My income improved years later, allowing me to shop more from the yarn shops rather than just the big box stores. I noticed a weird dynamic between the two types of stores and the yarn companies supplying them. The local shops favored high-end yarns, and even with less expensive fibers, smaller companies that were more expensive. Sometimes there was disdain for those who needed to keep a budget in mind. Crochet projects can easily suck up yarn, especially when making a blanket. This is an interesting ecosystem where you want to support small businesses, but it requires more money to do so. Part of what Carrie has to learn is that helping a community means helping everyone in it. Working with the community center is a great first step, but we all know she's going to stumble. Chapter 5. Carrie and kids. She has no desire for them. She considers the twins to be hers. This is something from the original Emma. There were already 2 kids in the mix, and Carrie doesn't want to take anything away from them. And in the original Emma, there's a lot here about the connected Knightley and Woodhouse families and how deeply connected they are. Not just between these 2 generations, but historically. It's important to Carrie that this be maintained. Also, she simply doesn't want kids. A few beta readers pointed out that it was weird for Lisa to ask this when they've just met. I agreed, but I didn't want to cut it out. It gave me a chance to explain the dynamic and why she's perfectly content with the relationship she has with Zach. Chapter 6. Welcome to Marriage and Candies. When I made the plot change to have Carrie focusing on small local businesses, I knew this was a chance to set up what became Sweeten Up Jenny Darcy. My hope was that you would read about it here, wonder what happened, and go to the next book. Without spoiling that book, Carrie should understand what happened with this store and why Mrs. Bennet is so disinterested in marketing help. But Carrie has dismissed this business already. She keeps trying to pay attention. She keeps trying without paying attention to the past. Her parents eventually share some of it, but most of the city doesn't know. Chapter 7. Bart. You know, when I write terrible men, I make them the worst. I know Bart and Eric needed to be different. Bart isn't looking for romance. There's no confusion here. What he wants is allies to his plan for the town. He's lazy, though, and happy to let others do the work for him and then take credit. So he wants Carrie to do the yarn bombing because it looks great, but she knows how much work it takes to organize. Chapter 8. Some of the chapters around Carrie's day-to-day in the yarn shop survived the rewrite. They were great opportunities to see Carrie and her community and to know some of what she's doing. She's not completely incompetent. Also, hi Elliot Bennett, your book is next. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't want the Bart-Carrie dynamic to be like Amelia's and Eric's. This isn't romantic, this is business. He's probably not even aware that he's intimidating her, but she's very uncomfortable. I find most women will understand that perfectly. Since it's not sexual or romantic, I had a chance to let Carrie regain control. This is her office and store. She's being told to do something by someone she doesn't care for. She's not going to wait for a rescue, and Zach isn't going to rescue her either. He knows she can hold her own against Bart, but he's going to be there to support her emotionally. Chapter 9. I went back on the way Carrie and Bart's battle should play out. Having written Eric and Amelia at war with each other, I wanted something more passive-aggressive and one-sided. In Emma, the original, Elton is trying to show Emma that she made a mistake. He's saving face, not going to war. His new wife is welcomed into the community because nobody knows what happened in the carriage. Even in Clueless, Elton moved on to Amber. She's a full-on Monet, without sparing a thought for Cher. In this case, I wanted Bart to wage a war that Carrie has no fucks about. She's already going to keep doing what she wants to do. Andrea isn't a new girlfriend, but now that Bart has lost the woman he thought was his greatest ally, he needs his girlfriend. Also, he's worried that people want to pair him up with someone local, so he decides it's time to show he's already got a partner. And Andrea is a delightful villain. She's coming back for more, and we will be exploring that she's not really the bad guy. Betty and Dolores, on the other hand, I may have written some of my colleagues into this book. They've since retired, but at the time. Chapter 10. The space Carrie wants to build is an important moment for her. While being a marketing consultant isn't working, there are other things that are. This plan is one of them. She's identified a need, seen something she can offer, and is willing to do the work to make it happen. The key is for her to learn to see more needs from people outside of her typical bubble. She's not shut down, she's ignorant. This is why everything seems to be crashing in on her. She's off balance. She's focused on the wrong things, but the right things are just off in the distance. Chapter 11. Things are still crashing on around her, and the ripple effects are finally impacting Carrie. She's going to snap soon. Chapter 12. As I write this commentary, my niece is too. When I wrote the book, she wasn't even a twinkle in my sister's eye. I couldn't have been more right about how 2-year-olds are, and I barely knew, mostly because of friends. But my niece would totally yell Happy Halloween at the top of her lungs. She did it over FaceTime with me today as she pulled out my sister's cutting boards. Chaos. Chaos is a 2-year-old. Cindy and Elsa are the Jane, Fairfax, and Frank Churchill characters, respectively. Since the romance of this story is focused around Carrie and Zach trying to evolve their relationship, romance between Elsa and Carrie was sort of an afterthought. Not that Carrie hasn't considered it, but she loves Zach, even if she can't admit it yet. Chapter 14. And Carrie snaps. In the original, it's Emma. The sin that pisses off Knightley is that Emma laughed a little too much at a self-deprecating joke that Miss Bates makes. That's Teresa in this book. She doesn't harm the woman or utter an insult. She laughs. And it reveals Miss Bates' worst fear about how people feel about her. Emma forgets herself for one moment trying to impress Frank Churchill and unintentionally hurts someone who doesn't deserve that. It is a simple but powerful slight. But Carrie's not trying to impress anyone. She snaps under the weight of all she's taken on and isn't working. She's cut out Zach, her main support system. She's pissed him off because of this, not just in their business, but in their lives. The word frogging was placed at the start of this chapter for a reason. This is Carrie's moment to decide if her error will ruin her project or not. If she's okay with the mistake, she can keep going. Sometimes a pattern is salvageable after an error. There are others where the mistake ruins everything. That's when you have to rip out row and row of work, sometimes hours of your time, to fix it and salvage your item. What will Carrie decide to do? I mean, I think we know. Because this is a happily ever after. We gotta get there. Chapter 15. I mean, she'll eventually get there. Characters fixing their problems shouldn't be super easy, barely an inconvenience. Carrie has a lot of work to do. And it starts with an apology to Teresa. That's the easiest, honestly, because Teresa is wonderful and a kind woman. And yes, she does get her happily ever after. That's coming in The Crafters of Lecoq. The scene with the twins getting lost was one of the first that came to me as I brainstormed. In the original Emma, there's a moment where Harriet, technically Lisa in this book, is rescued by Frank Churchill. Elsa. Something about that attack that you don't see You don't see any of it, actually. As I'm thinking about it, you don't see any of the attack. You see the after effects in Emma. Frank bringing Harriet to Emma afterwards. In Clueless, it's Ty's flirtatious. I don't even know what she's trying to do, but she's flirting with these two guys in the mall, and they dip her over the edge. It's always an emotional scene, which makes your emotions climb high, and you don't really see the reason in some cases. It only adds to the confusion Emma feels. I wanted to do something different. Carrie is trying to reconnect with Zach. She wants time with him to talk, but he's not ready for that. He's still angry. I wanted the emotion of the rescue with an opportunity for Carrie to come back to her center, her friends, and her family. Rather than increasing the confusion, it helps her remember who she is. Now that Carrie is coming back to center, she's able to see some of what's going on and why she might be spinning in every direction. Her parents' lives are changing, and they think their children want to be part of that. She's seeing that Zach and James are just as much part of the family as the people at the table with her. Chapter 16. There was never a harsh Ty moment in this book. But Zach played that role more than anyone else. Now that Carrie's back to her center, she can make things right. It's complicated because there's a lot to fix. First, it makes sure that she and Lisa are on the same page about what's happening at the community center. And then it's to let her plans to help the small businesses with marketing. Chapter 17. Carrie unveils her plan. When I wrote this book, I was in a tough spot. It was during the pandemic. I was stuck in the house trying to write. Cafes and libraries were closed, depriving me of my normal spots to work. I always struggled to focus when writing in the house. There were too many distractions, including a dog who wanted to be on top of me. I wanted a studio to rent, but it was always out of my budget. And I kept thinking about how this construction plan would be the perfect solution for me and so many others. And that's how it took shape, Carrie's plan. I wanted a spot that I could rent but not be stuck in the house for hours or being beholden to the hours and disruptions of a cafe or the cost of a cafe, because it might be free to sit there, but who gets to be the jerk if they don't buy anything? So Carrie's plan is one that I would have created myself, given creators and growing organizations that place to grow. I eventually got that. I eventually had somebody in the world who was doing something just like that and gave me a chance. I was also going to have more of Sally and Elsa's romance on the page, but the book was already chonky. And I really didn't care so much about their relationship. I never really liked the Jane Fairfax, Frank Churchill romance to begin with. So this really just... And I think you see it with Sally and Frank in Love and War in Woodhouse Hall. This romance just never really... It all is things being done to Emma and Carrie and Amelia rather than being her as an active participant. So it never really sat right with me. So I never thought much about their romance. Is Zach ready for this conversation? No. But Carrie really needs to have it. She sees what she wants and she goes after it. Now that she knows, she can't ignore the conversation anymore. And I've talked about it in many other books. My complaint about romance plots that could be resolved by a simple conversation. If you're going to play that game, you have to have a very good reason to not have that simple conversation. In this case, I think the refusal to have a conversation between our couple should be taken as a sign that this isn't a right relationship, especially if you're just starting something. With years of a relationship, in this case, 2 lifetimes, 2 individual people's lifetimes, there are other issues at play. This could be resolved with a simple conversation, but Zach knows Carrie and her patterns. He's bracing himself for it to end and afraid the conversation will mean the end of it. Plus, Zach is not a talker. His love language is cooking for her. That he's still baking something for her, cooking something for her, thinking of how he's taking care of her is a better sign than anything he could have said. Emma has a famous Knightley line. If I loved you less, maybe I could talk about it more. It was always a sign that Knightley's a man who acts rather than talks. Carrie knows that, but she needs to talk. And ultimately so does Zach. And she's going to push this conversation because it has to happen. Chapter 18. Bear with me while I set something up for Sweeten Up Ginny Darcy. I'll talk about the decision more when I do the commentary for that book, but things are put into motion here and they pay off in the next book. This is a plot point that was in the original draft. Carrie comes back to center, family and community. The result is that her family and community come through for her. Also, I have had the mashed potato bar at a university event, and I want it again before I die. And if everybody gets to have it at my funeral, good. You deserve it. It's a mashed potato bar. Epilogue. I wanted to open the space at the end and lead readers right into Sweeten Up Ginny Darcy. Of all the books in this series, none have ever so directly continued into the next book, just months later. I planned for the second half of the series to do that, but my plans changed, with a good idea. But more on that in the Romancing Mr. Tilney commentary, which will come in a while, unless it's already out, and then you can re-listen to it next, or in 2 books. Thank you for joining me for this audio commentary and annotations for Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, Book 5 in the 21st Century Austen series. If any of my coughing survived the edit, I am so sorry. I am getting over a cold, and this is the worst phase of that. I think I got it all, but there's quite possibly some stuck in here, there. And it is probably gross. But I am sorry. I will try to make sure you heard none of it. Thank you for joining me. The next book is Sweeten Up Ginny Darcy, which is a modernization of Pride and Prejudice, but with a gender swap. I'll see you then. Bye.